3 years ago, I stopped replanting my garden every spring, and the same beds are still producing food today without resetting, without new seed cycles, and without seasonal replanting. Most modern gardeners are locked into an annual system, till plant, harvest, and start over again like clockwork, exhausting time, money, and soil every single year. What I discovered comes from an Amish system built on a completely different principle, one designed to keep producing for decades once established. And the reason modern agriculture ignores it has nothing to do with productivity and everything to do with control, seed cycles, and how food systems make money. Stay with me, because once you understand how this works, you'll never look at a garden the same way again. Now, I want to be straight with you. For most of my gardening life, I planted things wherever there was an open space. Tomatoes went back into the same soil year after year because the cages were already there. Greens got scattered wherever I had room left, and I told myself it was efficient, that I was saving time by not overthinking it. But what it actually was, I realize now, was lazy planning dressed up as convenience, and the soil paid for it. Yields started dropping, pests showed up earlier every season, and no matter how much fertilizer or effort I added, it felt like I was working harder just to maintain the same results. If you've ever looked at your garden and wondered why it's not giving back what you put into it, you're not alone. I was right there with you for years, repeating the same cycle, thinking that was just how gardening worked, until I saw a system that didn't reset every season, and something finally clicked. A few winters back, I got a chance to walk through an Amish garden just outside Lancaster County, and it wasn't what I expected. There were no empty beds, no clean reset, just layers of crops, some finishing, some starting, others quietly storing energy beneath the soil. It looked less like a seasonal garden and more like a living system that never stopped working. That sent me down a path of digging into how these gardens were designed, and what I found was backed not just by tradition, but by agricultural research from institutions like the University of Wisconsin Extension. The principle is simple: stop fighting natural growth cycles and start structuring your garden to work with them. Let me show you how this Amish infinite food system actually works, because it's not one trick, it's a structure made up of 3 layers that support each other over time. Layer 1 is the perennial backbone. These are crops you plant once and harvest for years, sometimes decades. Think asparagus, rhubarb, lovage, sorrel, and perennial onions. In a typical garden, these get treated as extras. In this system, they are the foundation. You place them along the north side so they don't cast shade, and once they're established, you stop disturbing that soil completely. No tilling, no digging, no replanting. By year 2 or 3, these plants start producing heavily, and they keep increasing with time, not decreasing. Layer 2 is the self-seeding corridor. This is where things start to feel almost automatic. Crops like lettuce, arugula, dill, and cilantro are allowed to complete their full life cycle. Instead of pulling them out when they bolt, you let a few plants go to seed. Those seeds drop naturally, and the next generation comes up on its own, no planting required. The first year you guide it. By the second year it begins to stabilize. By the third year it's planting itself. I haven't intentionally planted lettuce in seasons, and yet it keeps showing up exactly when it's supposed to. Layer 3 is the rotation and overwintering beds. This is the only part of the garden where you still plant seasonally, but even here the goal is continuity. Garlic goes in before winter and comes out midsummer. That same bed immediately transitions into a fall crop like kale. Another bed carries summer crops, then gets covered with a winter cover crop to protect and rebuild the soil. A third bed fills the early spring and late fall gaps with cold hardy crops. The key idea is simple: no empty soil ever. And when you combine these 3 layers, something powerful starts to happen. At any point in the year, at least one part of your garden is producing, and often 2 or 3 at the same time. Spring doesn't feel like a reset anymore, it feels like a continuation. Now here where most people get it wrong, and I made this mistake myself for years. The first mistake is treating everything like an annual. When you do that, you lock yourself into constant labor. But when a third or even half your garden is perennial, your workload drops dramatically while your output becomes more stable. The second mistake is pulling plants too early, especially in that self-seeding corridor. The instinct is to clean things up to make the garden look neat, but in this system, messy is productive. Those seed heads you're tempted to remove are actually next season's crop already in motion. The third mistake is leaving soil exposed. Bare soil is a signal that your system is broken. It leads to weeds, moisture loss, and nutrient depletion. In this structure, something is always covering or occupying that space, either a crop, a cover crop, or mulch. Now here's the part that changed everything for me, And this is what most modern gardening guides completely miss. It's not about growing more plants, it's about choosing plants that don't need you as much. Once I shifted toward crops that return on their own, reseed naturally, or survive through cold seasons, the entire dynamic of my garden changed. By the second year, I noticed fewer weeds. By the third year, I was spending less than half the time I used to and harvesting more food overall. And this is exactly why systems like this are ignored at scale. Because they don't depend on constant input. No yearly seed purchases, no repeated soil disturbance, no seasonal reset that keeps you coming back to buy more. This system removes the cycle, and when the cycle disappears, so does the dependency. What you're left with is something far more stable, a garden that builds on itself year after year, a system that produces not just in peak summer but across seasons, and eventually something that feels less like work and more like a quiet, ongoing process that runs whether you interfere or not. And once it's in place, you don't start over next year. You just keep going. Now, before we move into the final piece that makes this system fully self-sustaining, I want to pause for a second. What I've shown you here is just one part of a much larger structure that took me years to fully understand and apply. I've broken the entire system down step by step, from layout to plant selection to timing, into a simple guide you can follow without guesswork. If you want to build a garden that actually runs like this, check the link in the description below. All right, let's keep going. Now let's take this a step further, because once the 3 layers are in place, this is where the system really starts to compound. What most people don't realize is that after the second or third year, your role begins to shift. You're no longer building a garden, you're managing a system that's already in motion. The perennial backbone starts producing earlier each season and lasting longer into the year. The self-seeding corridor becomes more predictable, filling in gaps without your input. And the rotation beds require less intervention because the soil is no longer being depleted the way it used to be. One simple upgrade that accelerates this process is interplanting across layers. Instead of separating crops strictly by type, you begin stacking them in the same space. For example, fast-growing greens like lettuce or radish can be grown between slower perennials during early spring. By the time the perennials expand, those quick crops are already harvested. That means you're getting 2 yields from the same space without increasing workload. Another key technique is selective harvesting. Instead of clearing entire plants, you take what you need and leave the rest to continue growing or reseeding. This keeps the system alive and productive without interruption. By this stage, you'll notice something different. The garden stops feeling seasonal. There's always something happening, something growing, something ready, and instead of chasing productivity, you're simply guiding it. Let me share some patterns I've noticed, things I got wrong for years that this system quietly fixes. The first pattern is overmanaging. I used to think more control meant better results, more pruning, more clearing, more but constant interference actually resets the system. In this setup, restraint is what allows it to stabilize. The second pattern is chasing short-term yield. Planting fast, harvesting everything, and clearing beds feels productive, but it breaks continuity. This system rewards patience. Some of the biggest returns come in year 2 and 3, not year 1. The third pattern is ignoring plant behavior. Not all crops are meant to be treated the same. Some want to return, reseed, or spread. Fighting that creates more work, working with it reduces it. I made all of these mistakes myself. Once I stopped forcing the garden into a schedule and started letting it operate as a system, everything changed. Now here's the part I promised you at the beginning. The piece that makes this system feel almost unfair once you start using it. It's a simple technique the Amish use to keep food coming even when nothing should be growing outside. Instead of letting mature roots sit dormant through the cold months, they bring a few of them indoors and trigger a second growth cycle. Crops like kale, chard, or even certain root vegetables can be lifted after the first frost, placed in containers with moist soil or sand, and kept in a cool, dark space. Within a few weeks, they begin producing fresh, tender shoots again. You harvest those shoots, and in some cases, the plant produces more than once before it's done. When spring returns, you can replant what's left. That one technique alone extends your harvest deep into the off-season and closes the final gap in year-round production. If this gave you a new way to think about your garden, don't just let it sit. Pick one layer and start there. Maybe it's planting your first perennial bed or simply letting a few crops go to seed this season. Drop a comment and tell me which part you're going to try first. I read every one of them. And remember this, the Amish don't build gardens that need constant restarting. They build systems that keep giving. Once you shift from replanting to structuring, everything changes. You're not chasing harvests anymore. You're building something that produces them year after year.